In my last video, I talked about how you should not make the mistake of believing that once you've left an abusive environment that everything's over and you can just sit back and take a breather. And the reason I said that was because there are three types of people that, if you're not careful, can ruin your abuse recovery progress, right? And so the first video I talked about anger. And so I would like for you to watch that video so that you can understand more about how people's relationship with anger can negatively affect how you recover from spiritual abuse. Okay, so that's in the first video. I'm going to talk about two more types of people that you need to be careful of. The second type of person that you need to be careful of as you are recovering from abuse is an agreeable person, right? Somebody, now you might be thinking, okay, like, well, what's wrong with being agreeable? Again, you have to think about it this in nuance. Sometimes it's good to be agreeable, but when you meet somebody who is overly agreeable, somebody who just will go along with whatever is going on, they're the kind of people who can throw you under the bus. And you might think, okay, well, why would somebody do that? Think about how what like agreeable people do, right? And all these begin with A. So that's why, I just want you to remember that. Okay, first one's anger, second one is agreeable. So I want you to take a minute to think about if someone is overly agreeable, how can that get in the way of your recovery? What's dangerous about it? And so take a second to think about that. And I have an example. So let's say you have a friend who is overly agreeable. And maybe something happened. Let's see, I'm trying to figure out like an example. Like maybe there was like some confrontation at work and somebody started something with you and you were the innocent party and your overly agreeable friend saw that exchange. That person may not help you, right? They may say, well, gosh, I don't want to get in trouble. I really want to stay out of it. It really is between the two of you, right? So HR is asking for witnesses, and your agreeable friend saw everything but will not speak up. Why? Because they are out to preserve themselves. They're timid and they are people pleasers. Now, I've talked about people pleasing in my series before, and that's not coming from a place of judgment, but we can hold two things to be true at once, right? We can say that people pleasing is a dangerous thing, and we can also say that people pleasing can also come out of a lot of different traumatic experiences or life experiences. But if you imagine that overly agreeable friend, they are not going to come to your rescue. And they may say something. Let me go this way. Another example of an overly agreeable friend is somebody who won't speak up for you. So maybe, something was happening, you were unfairly accused, and they knew and didn't speak up, and they didn't because they were afraid of the person who had more power. That is not a friend that I would recommend that you are close with because they're going to put themselves first. And that's the scary thing about people who are overly agreeable. They seem nice, right? But nice is very different from somebody who is kind and good and authentic. And so people who are agreeable are very nice, but it's a very surfacey type of nice, and they're really out for themselves. And so that's something you're not going to hear a lot, but it needs to be called out, right? And the reason I say that is because when I have worked with people who have been through these really awful experiences, there were people that stood by and did nothing. It's kind of like the bystander effect. There was a story, not a story, it was a real news event of a woman named Kitty Genovese. I think was her name, Genovese or Genovese, I'm not sure, but this was like back in, the 60s or something. And she was stabbed to death, and people heard her scream, and nobody did anything. Like, and the reason they didn't is because they figured, well, maybe someone else is going to do something, or, I don't want to get in trouble. I don't want the police asking me questions. And so I'm sure for all of you have been through any type of abuse, that there are people that knew and that could have done something and didn't. Now, again, this requires nuance to understand. Sometimes that person themselves may be at risk also of being harmed. And so they have to be careful as to how they do things. I'm not talking about that type of person. I'm just talking about the person who is overly obsessed with how people view them, and they don't want to get in trouble, so to speak, right? So this, your overly agreeable friend could easily tell HR, hey, this is what I saw happen, but they won't. They won't come through for you. And people who are overly agreeable, they tend to obviously put themselves first. But what's so dangerous about people like this is that it's not obvious, it's not very evident that they're putting themselves first. What they do is they always side with whoever has the most power. So they prioritize themselves, but they're not loyal, right? Whoever has the most power in that differential, they're going to side with. And I've seen that happen, plenty of times. And so that's really dangerous, because as you are recovering from your spiritual abuse journey, the last thing you need is someone throwing you under the bus, or being overly moralistic and self-righteous about their agreeable nature. And that's another thing. People that are overly agreeable, you'll see this if you are aware and discerning, that they're not as nice as they claim to be. They're people, they are the type of people who put themselves first for whatever reason. And that, I'm sure, some of you listening might put yourself in that category. So I encourage you to think about that. And the reason I say think about it is because it might apply to you, it might not. But I do know for a fact that people who are overly agreeable, that's what they're going to do, and you are going to get thrown under the bus. Be careful of people like that. Um, and so, and in the part, I'm going to go back a little bit. The part I talked about with them being self-righteous comes from them lecturing you. So people who are like that tend to follow orders without questioning them. And so anytime you question authority, you might say, hey, like, that thing that that leader did that didn't make sense, they will lecture you about you being a bad person, right? They may be like, well, that's not nice. We shouldn't say that about leaders, or, oh, you're gossiping, or, oh, whatever, and so it comes from this like very subtle but moralistic, self-righteous place of saying that because you are not agreeable, you are a bad person. And yeah, you shouldn't be agreeable. You should be agreeable to some things, but there are other things where you absolutely, in my opinion, should not be agreeable. Okay. In fact, people who are not agreeable are often the ones who start the fire in a good sense, and kick things off, and make things happen. Okay. So the second one is agreeable. The third is anxious, right? Um, and when I talk about anxiety, in this case, I'm talking about people who see their anxiety as a good thing. Now, again, this is where you're going to have nuance. Anxiety in and of itself is neutral, right? You need a certain level of anxiety sometimes, or I would say a lot of times, to do what you need to get done, right? So let's say a time deadline is coming up. Maybe you need to be moved and packed out of your apartment by a certain time. If you have zero anxiety about it, you're gonna be one of those people who the day of is putting stuff in the boxes, and the movers are like, looking at you like, what's going on? And it's just not a good thing. So there's that low, like almost non-existent anxiety, and then there's the other end of it where the anxiety is so much that it gets in the way of what you need to get done. So anxiety in of itself is neutral, but there are some people who have this very strong belief that because they're anxious, they are better and they care more. So for instance, I have overheard and even been in conversations where like people are talking about this big thing that's happening, and there are people that just don't get anxious about it. And then those people are being lectured by the ones who believe that, yes, you should be anxious about this, and because you're not anxious, you don't care. Okay. And that's not true. But you have to be very careful of people that are like that as you recover from spiritual abuse. Now, I want you to take a second and to think about, well, why should I be careful of somebody who is overly anxious, who sees their anxiety as a good thing? And the reason that I say that that's very dangerous is because the things that they do are out of a place of anxiety. And when you are continuing to do things out of a place of anxiety, you're going to hit a wall at some point. It's not, number one, is not only sustainable, um, you work against yourself because you're always trying to avoid something. And that can be like a whole other video in and of itself. My point is, it's not about being anxious. It's that person's belief about their anxiety. And a lot of people seem to like be very proud of their anxiety and look at it as a good thing. They might not say that, but their actions indicate that. One way, like I said, is the self-righteous way of looking down on people that are not anxious about something. But another way that this can come through is somebody just being, that through their anxiety, like they're trying to instill fear in you to do something out of a place of fear, right? So maybe a good example of this is that within any type of abusive environment, especially a spiritually abusive one, you're going to have a group of people that are always going to back the leader no matter what. This leader can never do anything bad in their eyes, and so the overly anxious person who believes that their anxiety is a good thing and they're, very like proud of it, and they just really over identify with it, they're going to be the kind of people that will stick around for the abuse and judge people that leave. And they're doing this out of a place of fear. So on one hand, they know, hey, like this bad stuff is going on, but then on the other hand, they're looking at their anxiety as a good thing, like don't rock the boat. Now, look, all of us have been in these positions at times, right? There have been times we don't do things out of fear. There may be times where we have been agreeable just so that we can get through whatever it is we're getting through. I'm not talking about isolated incidents. I'm talking about patterns, excuse me, in a way of doing things. So I don't know, I want you to think through your friend group or think about people you know and think about somebody who you feel fits this description, right? There's some people that we know who kind of just make anxiety their identity. That's the word I was looking for. So they make anxiety their identity. And so because they make that their identity, then everything they do is going to be from a place of that. And so they're going to be telling you, well, don't do this because this bad thing might happen, or do this because this bad thing might happen, right? They're just like laser focused on that anxiety, and they over identify with it. They make it part of their identity. And they also sometimes do that with trauma that they've experienced. I'll probably do another video on this, but I've really noticed, and this is a concerning trend to me that I've seen, is people making their trauma their identity. And if you have that way of thinking, you will never progress past that trauma. Okay. So it's important that if you are dealing with somebody who is anxious, that they figure out a good way to relate to that anxiety. Anxiety is not bad in of itself, but if it's controlling that person or they make that their identity, it is going to affect you too. And you will probably get thrown under the bus or, whatever. Maybe they'll be the first one to sing like a canary when the pastor or whoever wants to know who did something, right? So, they'll be the first one to say, oh, they did this or they said this about you or whatever. So I hope you understand where I'm going with all this. My point with all this is that just to see how people are relating to their own challenging emotions, because if they don't have a good relationship with their emotions, it's going to affect you. And this is why I also say that therapy is a huge part of spiritual abuse or any type of abuse recovery, because you want to be able to identify with your feelings in a healthy way. So I hope that has been helpful to you. I would love to hear from you also in the comments. Like I said, the three types of people we want to avoid. people who have a poor relationship with their anger, they're kind of like on either end, and then people who are really agreeable, and then people who make anxiety their identity. What other types of people do you see? Do you agree? Do you disagree? I'd love to hear from you in the comment section. And I also want to say that I've noticed some pretty awful comments in the comment section from some people. And just know that you will be blocked if you try that here. This is a space for people to recover and to to be safe as they can be, and to be heard and to be respected. And so just putting that out there, because as this channel grows, I'm seeing more of this and I have zero tolerance for that. So don't try it over here because you will get blocked. My website is skillsetcounseling.com. Go over there and you can figure out and see what kinds of services are available. And I will see you in the next video. All right, take care. Bye-bye.